what is just a placebo effect, but most people don't realize. My mom often tells a story from when she was young. Her older brother would frequently complain of stomach aches because he didn't like going to school. However, if my grandma put some bandages on his tummy, he would feel better instantly. Now, my mom is a second grade teacher and she goes through a lot of bandages because they help the kids feel better about everything. Once, a kid got excited while running, tripped, and fell, so he got a cool SpongeBob bandage. All the other kids immediately started asking for bandages for their own little scrapes and things. Before long, every student had a bandage somewhere. Sometimes, when my mom sees a student crying after getting hurt, she uses a little trick that works like magic. She asks them to move their foot around or jump in a circle, and then she blows on their hand to make it feel better. After that, she asks if they're ready to play again. One little trick she learned is especially effective. When a kid has a minor injury, she asks them a left side of the brain question. This makes them switch their thinking to answer the question. My favorite trick with my daughter is to ask, "How many kisses does this owie need?" She stops crying to think about it, and then we count the kisses together. By the time we're done counting, 9 times out of 10, she's calmed down and ready to go back to what she was doing. Wow, this is so true. When a kid gets hurt, if you're all like, "Aw, what's wrong? Are you okay?" then they'll freak out. But if you just calmly tell them they're okay, they will actually calm down and be okay. Story 2. When I was working and training people for tech support, our team would often face pushbacks from customers when we suggested they restart their phones. This simple step usually solved their problems most of the time. To get around this, I had our agents ask the customers to read out some numbers from the back of the battery, which we didn't actually need. This was back when phone batteries were still removable. After the customer did this, we would tell them that we had refreshed a few systems, and then they would put the battery back in and their phone would be fixed. For phones with non-removable batteries, we would tell customers that if the phone stayed on while we did an update, it could damage their SIM card. So they would make sure to turn off their phones. We wouldn't actually do anything, and when they turned their phone back on, it would work perfectly. However, if we had just told them to restart their phones, they wouldn't have been as cooperative. I also have a client with a very difficult and unpredictable printer. She calls every time she tries to replace her toner. I'm always sent to fix it, even though I really don't know what's wrong with the printer. It just doesn't like doing what it's supposed to do. So I press some buttons, make some beeps, and open covers and plates until the printer recognizes the toner. I just told her that I had to reset some software settings and then it's good to go. She's the type of person who calls us whenever something doesn't work immediately, especially with technology. Just a couple days ago, I advised a client to close and reopen their web browser to fix an issue on our website. The client had complained that the site was slow today, even though several team members had shown that it wasn't. The client closed and reopened their browser and the problem was solved. In fact, they had left the browser open for months and it was using up a lot of memory, so it needed to be restarted. Well, I can just imagine the conversation with this client with their browser being like, "Sir, when you click on tabs, how many do you see? Oh, it says 99. Yep, that means it stopped counting." Story 3. When I do creative work for clients, I've noticed something interesting. If I finish and deliver the project on the same day or the next day, they often think I didn't spend enough time on it. But if I wait 3 days to send it to them, they're usually happier because they assume I've been working on their project nonstop, even if I actually finished it a day or two earlier. One time, I painted a portrait of a client's dog using acrylic paint. I took photos of the painting and sent them to her. She said she wanted to make some changes, like making the hair lighter and the mouth a bit smaller. A few hours later, I accidentally sent one of the photos I had already sent her again. She immediately replied, "Yes, this is exactly what I want," even though I hadn't made any additional changes, but it's okay. Story 4. For a few years while I was in university, I worked at the bar in the executive suite of a stadium. It was the nicest and most expensive dining option in this stadium, but it was still just a stadium in the north of England for a League One football team. This means we didn't have a lot of money and most of the fans didn't either. It's not like we were working for a big team like Manchester United. We were told that we wouldn't be making special drinks and we only sold house wine by the glass. We had 3 types of red, white, and rosé wine each, the basic house wine, a middle-priced option, and a fancier one. We also had Prosecco and Champagne, but those were only sold by the bottle. It was mad how often people would insist that we had served them the best wine by the glass last time they were there. At least once during every match, someone would demand that we replace the cheap house wine with a glass of the wine that cost £25 per bottle. Every single time this happened, we were told to pour the wine into a fresh glass and have a different waiter take it back to the customer. I guess this was so that if the customer said anything, the waiter could pretend not to know what was going on. And every single time, the customer would insist that the wine now tasted better, even though it was exactly the same wine they had complained about before. Story 5. Homeopathy is something my mom practices, but I don't believe in it. I'm not here to argue about it, but I've seen her help many people with minor to moderate health issues. The homeopathic medicine itself doesn't work, but the patients think it does. When you sit down with someone for an hour and they really listen to all your problems and health concerns and they show more interest than a regular doctor would, it makes you believe you'll get better. I think the psychological help they get often helps with their problems, especially if those problems are made worse by stress. It's important to note that any good homeopath won't try to treat serious illnesses or threatening conditions that need real medical care, and they'll tell their patients this. A study found that homeopathic consultations are usually much longer than visits to medical doctors. For parents, this can make a big difference. When they're feeling vulnerable and tired because their sick child isn't sleeping, having someone really listen to them means a lot. By listening, the homeopath can give practical advice and encourage the parents to follow it. So there's a practical and psychological benefit on top of the placebo effect of the homeopathic pills, which are basically just watered-down sugar. This is partly because the public health system is flawed, and doctors are often too busy and not trained enough in empathy to spend enough time with their parents. But remember, homeopathy is only good for minor issues and other stuff. Relying on it for some serious health problems is dangerous, and there's no denying that. Also, homeopathic treatments for headaches and muscle cramps are supposed to be taken with a full glass of water. Many headaches and muscle cramps can be relieved just by drinking water and waiting for about 30 minutes. If you want to take some sugar pills along with it, well, that's up to you. Story 6. Using gas with a higher octane rating than what the car maker suggests is a common thing people do. They might say, "Oh, my car runs so much better on premium than regular." But the octane rating of gasoline isn't about how much energy is in the fuel, it's actually about how well the fuel can resist something called pre-detonation. If the car maker says to use 87 octane, putting in 91 or 93 octane won't make any difference. The car can't tell that you're using a higher octane fuel. It can only tell if you might be using a lower octane fuel by using something called a knock sensor. If the sensor hears knocking or pinging, the car's computer will adjust the timing to stop the knocking. Changing the timing can make the engine less powerful. The car's computer uses a fuel map to manage the engine, and this map is made for a specific octane rating. In high-performance cars, the engine has a higher compression and more aggressive timing, so higher octane fuel is needed. If your car says it needs premium fuel, then you should use it. If it says premium is recommended, you can use regular fuel unless you're driving the car really hard. Don't spend the extra money on premium gas just because your car feels better with it. Story 7. Kind of an anti-placebo, but MSG actually isn't bad for you. Multiple blind studies suggest that eating MSG results in no negative reactions, but knowing that you have eaten MSG can result in headaches. It is in your body already in some form or another. The crazy part is when people request no MSG, then dump a huge amount of sauce on it which contains MSG. What MSG does is slightly suppress your body's ability to feel satiated after a meal, so you may eat more or feel hungry again after a short time. So I used to work at a Korean restaurant and I had some uppity Karen type demand to know if we used MSG in our food. I explained that there was naturally occurring MSG in everything we served because almost everything on our menu had mushrooms in it, or, barring that, mushroom salt, which is just freeze-dried and powdered cremini mushrooms. It's a fantastic ingredient, go buy some. Po Lu Ku is my favorite brand. She then, in the most condescending way possible, tried to educate me on the fact that MSG was a chemical, and therefore couldn't possibly come from nature. You know, much in the same way that sodium chloride is a chemical too. Alright, if you're feeling any of these stories and the ridiculous characters in some of them, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. On to the next story. Story 8. When I was working a catering gig at my university, everyone eating off fancy plates at sit-down dinners in the ballrooms, fundraisers and receptions, and every other formal dinner occasion that might be held at a university, were eating the same bulk commercial-grade food that was served in the dorms. They tell us to give their compliments to the chef. Lady, the only difference between your $40 fancy reception plate pork chop and my $4 cafeteria pork chop was that mine came on a paper plate. And yes, I do happen to know where the chef gets his choice cuts, Aramark Food Services, just like everyone else. But you put that stuff on a delicate plate with gold on the edges, they think it's the most wonderful thing they've eaten all year. Story 9. Wine sommelier. I still can't believe there's a profession out there to tell people what wine is the best when the sense of taste is subjective and not universal to the human race. Your entire career is based on your own opinion and not applicable to literally the rest of the world. But people will still believe them and their judgment of wine and then agree that it is in fact blah 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 because this guy said so. Final moment for me was a head-to-head with 5 sommeliers as to who could identify a wine by taste. They were all given one glass of wine and asked if they could identify the country and year of their respective wines. They all came up with something different based on the taste and the reasoning behind their choice, only to be told they were all drinking the same cheap red from a local corner store. Also, one more thing, wine prices. They've done studies that show people think wine tastes better if it costs more, but when they do a blind test taste, very few people, even people who are wine drinkers, can't distinguish between pretty cheap $15 to $20 bottles and expensive wine. Story 10. If you're successful in your town, you might think you're really successful compared to everyone else in the world. For example, the leader of a village with a very simple lifestyle, like cavemen, might be happier than a poor person living in a big city. Even though the poor city person has more things, knows more, and probably has an easier and longer life, that's not what makes someone feel successful. It's more about how much control you have over your day and whether you have more than the people around you. People often would rather live in the elite or nicer part of a smaller, less wealthy town than live in a not-so-great part of a rich city. This is because we're used to comparing ourselves to the people around us. In a similar way, this idea also applies to intelligence. In my middle school, I was seen as the smartest kid and graduated as a valedictorian. But when I went to a prestigious high school, I was surrounded by many other smart people, and I started to lose confidence. I developed something called imposter syndrome where I no longer felt smart. This made me less likely to take some of the harder classes that I was interested in. I graduated from a good college prep school with great SAT scores and got into a top-tier university. This university only accepts students who are in the top 10% of the graduating class. So I'm sitting in chemistry class wondering why it's so much harder than I expected. Well, everyone around me was also in the top 10%, so now I'm average or even below average, struggling to keep up. I found that the classes I had a natural talent for, like history, philosophy, biology, English, and anthropology, were great for me. But the subjects I had only done okay in during high school were a nightmare. I had to work really hard to keep up with the other kids in those classes. Story 11. My dad used to be in charge of summer camps, and every time there would be some kids who would say the lake was too cold. So one day he took an old electrical lever and nailed it to a pole on the edge of the lake. Then he ran a wire from the lever to the ground. It was clear that the lever wasn't connected to anything, but whenever a kid complained about the cold, he would say he would turn on the heating system for the lake. He would flip the lever, and after that, there would be no more complaints because the kids believed the lake would get warmer. Eventually, kids would even ask him to turn on the heater before they even got into the water. Early on, I worked at Starbucks for 2 years. I made a regular's drink and it, quote, wasn't right. Possible, but I'm pretty sure I did it right. My supervisor told me how to make it and watched me redo it. The lady liked it, and I later asked what I'd done wrong. She said nothing. It was a customer. But then 2 years later, that same lady was sad to hear I was leaving since I was, quote, one of the only ones who knows how to make it. From time to time, we get customers that are adamant we made their drink not sweet enough or too sweet than what it usually is and give their drink back. I will go to the back and remake their drink, but instead pour some of the same drink they just gave back into a sample cup and let them try it and ask them if it tastes better. They always say, oh yes, it tastes perfect now. Sometimes my customers ask me to turn the heat up or down because they were too hot or cold. I'll be like, oh yeah, definitely, let me go take care of that for you. Then I would go stand in the back, drink some water, and then head back to the table and tell them I'd adjusted the temperature. It worked every single time. Story 12. The button to cross the street at intersections is sometimes there just to make people feel like they're doing something, but it doesn't actually change the traffic lights. The buttons inside elevators that are supposed to close the doors are often not connected to anything. When you see things advertised with words like tactical or military grade or made with materials from the space shuttle, it's usually just marketing talk. Toys that claim to go really fast, like 120 scale miles per hour, are actually going much slower if you do the math. For example, if a toy is 1/20th scale, it's really only going about 6 miles per hour. The fuel economy numbers you see on a car websites from dealerships or manufacturers are never exactly right. The tests that give those numbers are done by the car companies themselves, and they don't like to share those secrets. Products that say they're all natural or organic or non-GMO are often just a little less processed than other similar products. At the grocery store, when customers ask if there's more of a product because the shelf is empty, as an employee, I'm happy to offer to go out to the back to the storage room to check for them. Even though I know there's nothing more of that product, I still do it. Taking a walk around the storage room does two things. First, it makes a customer feel like I've done my best to help them. And second, it gives me a short break from work. During this time, I can gather my thoughts and take a moment to relax. Story 13. When a used car salesman tells you he needs to ask his manager if he can give you a special deal, you might just be going to the staff break room to watch Jerry Springer on the old TV and drink a Dr. Pepper. Then he comes back with a special deal that he says was approved just for you. But in reality, every car has a range of prices that the dealership is willing to accept. As long as you're within that range, you're getting a fair deal. It wouldn't make sense for a business if employees had to run to their managers every few minutes. This was especially true for us when we bought our cars. When we bought a Honda, the dealership offered us $80,000 for our 14-year-old car. When we were looking at a Baleno for my mom, the dealership lowered the price of a new car by $25,000. And finally, when I had been riding my scooter on the highway at speeds over 80 kilometers per hour, they saw that we just wanted a car and reduced the price of a mid-range model with ABS and airbags by another $20,000. Each time we visited the showrooms again, we noticed they were offering other customers the same deals. Story 14. As a sound engineer, during sound checks with bands, there are times when a musician wants to hear themselves louder through the monitors. However, if I turn their volume up too much, we could get unpleasant feedback loops. So, often, I'll just place my hand on the volume knob and pretend to turn it until the musician says, "Yeah, that's perfect, thank you." When setting up audio for rehearsals for plays or concerts, producers might tell the sound person to add more bass or to make something louder or quieter. In many cases, I will just pretend to adjust the settings. Usually, people will say the sound is okay after hearing the supposedly changed sound because most people aren't very good at noticing subtle differences in audio. I have a much better sense of what will sound good than the play director does since they're not specialists in acoustics. Story 15. Anything that you think cures hiccups? Ever wonder why there are so many cures out there that people swear by? It's because hiccups often, though not always, have a major psychological component. Your diaphragm spasms for real a few times, but then something in your brain takes over and makes you think subconsciously you need to keep doing it so they won't go away. Then someone tells you they know a cure. Since it's coming from your head now, if you believe something will work, it will, and once it works once, you believe it more and it will be more effective. Doesn't matter what the cure is, it just matters that you believe it'll work. This is also why you can have them scared or startled out of you. It's actually just a distraction that makes you forget to keep hiccuping. Once you know this, you won't get incurable hiccups anymore. When it happens, it's because there's actually something happening to your diaphragm, but once that's over, they'll just stop. Don't try this approach with other conditions though, please. Most things can't be gotten rid of just by believing you don't have them. Well, for me, I always hold my breath for like 30 seconds. I don't know whether or not the act of holding my breath actually does it, but whatever it is, it works. And if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for watching this one with me.